Good evening from Washington. I'm Ezra Klein, sitting in for the spectacular Chris Hayes. Tonight on All In, the day before his vacation, President Obama holds a nearly hour-long press conference and makes some big news on the country's surveillance programs. Also tonight, the president defends Obamacare and slams Republicans for hating on it but not having much of a plan of their own. And one of the most powerful women in the world is opening up about her very recent and surprising run-in with racism. I will tell you Oprah Winfrey's incredible story, and Melissa Harris Perry will put it into context. All that is ahead. But tonight we begin with President Obama's news conference in which he took on Obamacare and the threat by some Republicans to try to shut down the government over it when they have no alternative plan. We will get to that soon. But one area where President Obama was really engaged today was the issue of surveillance and the national debate that has arisen, particularly since Edward Snowden leaked classified information. The president today describing 4 steps he would take to make the NSA both more transparent and more accountable, including working with Congress to tighten the Patriot Act, making sure someone represents civil liberties concerns before the powerful and secretive surveillance courts, making public the legal rationale for the government's collection activities and other steps to be more transparent about the government's surveillance program, and forming a group of outside experts to review the government's intelligence and communication technologies. The president went on to describe the questions over the balance between national security and individual liberty as a necessary debate, one we need to be having. And he said those on both sides of it are patriots.
The men and women of our intelligence community work every single day to keep us safe because they love this country and believe in our values. They're patriots. And I believe that those who have lawfully raised their voices on behalf of privacy and civil liberties are also patriots who love our country. So this is how we're going to resolve our differences in the United States, through vigorous public debate, guided by our Constitution, with reverence for our history as a nation of laws, and with respect for the facts.
But what about the guy who kicked off that debate? Is Edward Snowden a patriot? When the president was asked, he said, not so much.
No, I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot. As I said in my opening remarks, I called for a thorough review of our surveillance operations before Mr. Snowden made these leaks. The fact is that Mr. Snowden's been charged with 3 felonies. If, in fact, he believes that what he did was right, then, like every American citizen, he can come here, appear before the court with a lawyer, and make his case. I signed an executive order well before Mr. Snowden leaked this information that provided whistleblower protection to the intelligence community for the first time. So there were other avenues available for somebody whose conscience was stirred and thought that they needed to question government actions.
There is a tension here. The White House says it believes in this debate. It believes in the reforms the debate has made possible, but, not big fans of Edward Snowden. President Obama said we could have and probably would have ended up in the exact same place without him. But do you remember this moment from March?
What I wanted to see is if you could give me a yes or no answer to the question, does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
That is Director of National Intelligence James Clapper telling Senator Ron Wyden back in March that the Obama administration is not collecting data on millions of Americans. That statement was, what's the word for it, a lie. Clapper had to apologize, but not because the Obama administration wanted a more robust debate and corrected him on television or privately the next day or the next week or the next month. It was only after Snowden's leaks, the Obama administration, that Clapper had to apologize. The Obama administration has not been forthcoming on this debate they say they welcome. Absent Mr. Snowden, it is hard to believe we would be having this debate at all. Joining me now is Liza Goyden, co-director of the Liberty and National Security Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Liza, thank you for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ezra.
Let's begin with the president's policy announcement here. Are the 4 steps, in your view, meaningful in terms of what they mean, either for what the NSA is able to do or what we will know about what they are doing?
The devil is very much in the details on these 4 steps. The most significant step that he announced that we know much about is the creation of some kind of adversary process within the secret FISA court. Now, that's the court that approves these surveillance programs, and it does so with only one party, that's the government, appearing before it. And Obama said that he was willing to consider a system where there would be someone else there to represent the other side, presumably the public interest. And that could conceivably be an important step. The devil is in the details in terms of how that person is appointed, what information that person has access to, what cases that person can actually participate in. So we'll have to see. And then there was some talk about changes to the Patriot Act, but that talk was entirely nonspecific. So it is impossible to evaluate whether the president is contemplating any meaningful changes.
One thing I was interested in President Obama's mention of changing the FISA court, the big surveillance court, is that right now one of the problems folks have identified, one of the problems you've talked about in some interviews, is that every one of the judges on it is appointed directly by the Chief Justice. So at the moment that means all 11 justices or judges are appointed by Chief Justice John Roberts. Now there's legislation in Congress to actually diversify that process so you wouldn't have the effect where the entire court reflects the makeup of whoever happens to be leading the Supreme Court at that particular moment. That, I thought it was notable that was not one of the remedies that President Obama endorsed here. It was something internal to the government that would change. There would be someone else at the table potentially arguing. But the actual composition of the court, who is on it, would not change.
I actually think that change would be less important than the change that the president did focus on, which is the adversarial nature of the process, because we can see, looking at the FISA court's record during a time when its judges were more diverse, shall we say, ideologically in terms of who appointed them, its record of granting government requests was similar to what it is now. So I think we can say that any time you have a secret court, regardless of who is on that court, that is evaluating a government national security related request with no pushback from any other quarters and no transparency, you are going to see decisions slanted very much in the government's favor. So that really is what needs to change. But these are all issues of process. And what we didn't see was any willingness on the president's part to acknowledge or to concede that there may be something inappropriate about the government collecting all Americans' telephone records in order to find the tiny fraction of those records that might actually relate to terrorism. Nor did we see any explanation for why it's necessary to follow that approach.
Well, and the argument President Obama made today was that there's been a lot of hype about these programs, and there's been a lot of talk about the potential for abuses, but there hasn't actually been a proof of abuses. And I think his argument or his view on this is that what we've seen here is fear, and all that the government needs to do is to allay that fear, to assure people that the government is doing what it needs to do, that there's not actually any wrongdoing. How confident are you that's true?
I'm not confident that it's true simply because I don't think we've had the kind of investigation you need to uncover these sorts of abuses. What we found out about the government's practices during the Cold War, we found out almost entirely because the Church Committee was formed and dug deep and had subpoena power. We've had nothing like a Church Committee. So have these powers been abused? I don't think we really know. But let's assume for the time being that it's true that they haven't been abused, that we're only worried about potential for abuse. I am not comforted by President Obama saying that he is inside government. He's seen everybody who works on this program and everybody's trustworthy, so it's okay. President Obama is not going to be in power 4 years from now. We don't know who will be in power 4 years, 8 years, 12 years. And when he tells me he trusts everyone in the intelligence community, then presumably he trusted Edward Snowden at one point, too. I mean, clearly there are people in the intelligence community who violate their pledges or even who violate the law. And if they're going to do that in order to leak information, they're just as likely to do it in order to invade privacy for some political or personal reason.
Liza Goitain from the Brennan Center for Justice, thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
And joining me now is Robert Gibbs, NBC political analyst and former press secretary for President Obama, Spencer Ackerman, U.S. national security editor for The Guardian newspaper, and Julian Sanchez, a fellow at the Cato Institute. Thank you all for being here tonight. And Robert, I actually wanted to begin here with you. One of the fascinating things about the press conference to me was the certainty President Obama had that these were necessary programs. And you think back to the campaign and the sort of the aggressive civil liberty rhetoric you heard back then. What happens to an administration? What changes, if anything, has changed when you come in, you begin getting those briefings? Do you think there's been a change in the way the Obama administration treats civil liberties?
I don't think there's been a change in the way they treat civil liberties. I think what you saw here today was what I've heard then Senator Barack Obama and a candidate in 2004 running for the U.S. Senate say we needed somebody watching the watchers. So I don't think there's been a change in civil liberties. I think obviously when you're the commander-in-chief and when you get a sense and see all of what goes into these programs and all of what they uncover in terms of terrorism leads, it presents a picture that you don't normally or wouldn't normally get unless you're intimately involved in the running of the program. So I think obviously your view becomes more nuanced as you become more informed about exactly what threads are out there, what threads you can pull, and where they lead to potential terrorism suspects.
Spencer, you've been at The Guardian quite intimately involved with the Edward Snowden leak, with the reporting on it, with the divulging of this information. Do you think, as a longtime national security reporter, that we would be having this debate, we would have this information if not for Snowden?
Absolutely not. I mean, the evidence of that is that we didn't. It's not just administration officials like Jim Clapper lying to Congress, but it's also just the absolute silence about this throughout the entire administration. To make a quick point, something you didn't hear about in Obama's press conference at all, and you didn't get from any of the documents released today, is a recognition that the deputy director of the National Security Agency testified to last month, which is that in not one case can the National Security Agency say definitively that the bulk phone records collection program that they've put on all of our phone records has stopped, has made the difference to a single terrorism case.
That's kind of there was a release about a Somalian terrorist incident, right, that seemed relatively small, they claimed as a big success for the NSA, but you don't think that actually qualifies?
Well, when the deputy director of the NSA testifies that there are some ways that you should understand the program that isn't necessarily related to its efficacy in stopping a terrorist plot, but helps with analysis of other stuff, it really does raise the question in a lot of people's minds about how necessary this bulk collection really is, and that's an issue you haven't seen the president address. It's an issue that a lot of people in Congress are very concerned about.
Julian, on the question of how the information got divulged, you've had an enormous growth in the U.S. security state since 2001. The amount of new efforts, both technological and legal, that they have, the new capabilities are tremendous. Are folks like Snowden a necessary check on that? Because without that, you're essentially hoping for the government to be significantly or sufficiently forthcoming to actually create enough checks and balances to make sure there are no abuses going on.
I think that's right. In much the same way as we recognize that the press stands outside the government, but in some sense is an integral part of a functioning democracy, the same can be said about whistleblowers. I mean, Jefferson famously said they're forced to choose, he'd rather have a press without government than government without press. Whistleblowers in the same way almost necessarily are outside the formal channels, but are in a way a check and a guarantee that's absolutely essential. So just in the same way that the leak of the Pentagon Papers was a necessary factor in turning public opinion against the Vietnam War, that certainly would never have happened through internal channels. I think the debate we're having now and the fact that the public reaction to it has forced this move shows that this doesn't happen when the secret keepers, determine what is in the interest of national security for the public to know about.
Robert, isn't there a tension in President Obama arguing this is a debate that the White House welcomes, that it believes it's important, that the civil libertarians and the members of the intelligence community are patriots, and at the same time being furious and saying Snowden, who helped kick much of it off and release much of his information, isn't a patriot?
I don't think there's an inherent tension. I mean, look, I agree with what's been said here. We would clearly not be having nearly as vociferous a debate nearly as detailed a set of procedures and policies that came out today were it not for this. But let's still be clear. Leaking this type of information is illegal, right? When you gain a clearance to have access to this type of information, they take you into a room, and all the pictures on the room are not of presidents and secretaries of states, they're of convicted spies, okay? You know the rules, right? My office, the press secretary's office, because it's a publicly trafficked office, and I had access to top secret and some compartmentalization above that, has a safe in the office. When I'm done reading that stuff, if I don't want it burned in the Situation Room, it goes into that safe. It gets logged in that I've put it in. So I think there's no doubt we are having this debate because of that. Let's also be clear that regardless, Edward Snowden broke laws that he swore to uphold. And look, I do think this is a very important debate, and I think, quite frankly, what you saw today is really kind of the opening bid, right? We saw the amendment to defund the entire set of programs fail just narrowly in the House. And I think that was sort of an indication to everybody that this was a way, way bigger debate that we were about to have, and I think that will occupy a significant amount of Congress's time in the fall than we had thought probably a week or two before. And the polling clearly shows that even as people want to be safe from terrorism, there are concerns about privacy. So I think this is the beginning of, what's going to occupy a lot of administration time.
I want to talk about that next bid right when we get back.